Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 18th season of CityWide. My guest on this edition of CityWide is Police Union Leader Patrick Lynch, President of the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association. Welcome to CityWide.
Great to be with you, Ken.
Pat, before we get into the many issues that you deal with on a daily basis, I would suspect that for many of our viewers, the only thing they know about the PBA is either there's some character on Law and Order that says he wants to talk to his PBA delegate, or they know somebody that has a card that thinks they're entitled to park anywhere in the city. So why don't you tell us, what is the PBA?
We represent White Shield New York City police officers. The police officers you see riding in the radio cars every
White
day.
Shield, meaning white police officers?
The shield, the silver shield,
Silver shield
that police officers wear. There's different ranks within the NYPD. We represent the police officer, the ones you see on a regular basis in the radio cars, out in the neighborhoods. We negotiate their contract for fair wages, working conditions, and quality of life issues. We represent them when they're wrongfully accused. We're basically the voice of the police officer in uniform out on the street.
So Bill Deblasio was elected talking about a tale of two cities, and in the Dinkins novel, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And I would posit for the New York City Police Department, that's also true. It's the best of times and that crime is down to the lowest levels in our lifetimes. And on the other hand, relationships with the police, or the perception of how police tactics have been implemented, have damaged the reputation of the police department to a level that we haven't seen since the Diallo and Louima situations back in the 90s. So are New Yorkers schizophrenic about the police department?
It goes like this, and it always has. When times are tough out in the street and when crime was running rampant, and we know that from the areas I worked and you lived, they needed the police, they wanted the police, and they wanted you to go out and be aggressive and go after the crime and the bad guys that were robbing you and graffitiing on the subway and quality of life issues. Then as we improved, and we did that, we did it block by block. As things improved, you forget exactly how bad it was, and then you have more time to critique each step that a police officer does and also criticize them. And it all falls on the shoulders of the New York City police officer, the person, the man or woman standing on the corner in uniform. It's the one form of government that everyone sees. So every issue lands on his or her shoulders. If another agency within the city doesn't work or falls down on the job, it's left to the police officer to resolve that problem. Many times that gets lost in the dialogue that's going on. And also what gets lost is we're not the policy makers. We're a paramilitary organization. Orders come down from the higher ups, as they used to say in the police department, and we have to follow them. But we don't set that policy. We're going through a time when there's a lot of conversation about stop, question, and sometimes frisk. Well, we have a problem with that too. It's improved in recent history, but we've been speaking out about this since 2002. And the problem with it was that there was a quota attached to it.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit, because one of the things I wanted to ask you was that during the last year, when New Yorkers were debating stop and frisk, even stop, question, and frisk has sort of an ideological context to it. I heard a lot of debate between elected officials and community leaders on the one side, Ray Kelly and Mike Bloomberg on the other side. I don't remember it being the PBA's issue. And is that perception right? And then at the same time, de Blasio has now settled some litigation, some lawsuits having to do with how stop, question, and frisk is administered, but the PBA still fighting on. So take us back to last year and walk us through where you are on this.
What got lost in the dialogue and the media reports and the discussions at the city council and the like was that, again, it's a policy you should be looking at, not blaming the individual police officer. And again, we take the blame, unfortunately, most of the time. But no one wanted to look at the crux of the problem. And it was more basic than the discussion went. And it came down to the fact that the police department put a quota. It became numbers driven, whether it was summonses, arrests, or stop, question, and sometimes frisk. So they were saying to an officer, we need 5 what we call 250s. Well, that's a problem.
What's a 250?
It's the form you filled out with a stop, question, and frisk within the police department.
And they were actually telling the officers there's a certain
right.
number you have to do.
And there was an awful lot of pressure on the individual police officers to meet these numbers. And if you don't, there was discipline. You got bad assignments. Your days off with your family would be canceled. You would be moved to a different shift. So that was the problem, not the tool, is they were misapplying the tool. In policing, it should never be a number put on for an arrest, a summons, or a stop, question, and frisk. It should be based on the evidence that the police officer sees. Look, as police officers, we're not afraid to articulate why we made that stop, why we gave that summons, or testify to the evidence that led us to that arrest. But when you put a number on it, discipline the police officer not meeting that number, that's when it goes afoul of the law. And that was the problem. And the discussion, the heated dialogue that went on, people weren't addressing that problem. The laws that were passed in the city council didn't address the real crux of the problem. It just kept getting glazed over and got lost in the arguments.
So I've had police officers, friends of mine, say to me that what it did was it took away their discretion.
That's right.
It took away their ability to be police officers and to do their job. But what the former commissioner would say was, well, it clearly worked. The numbers went down. Crime went down to record levels. Everybody understood. Don't take your gun with you. You're gonna, you're subject to being stopped appropriately, perhaps. So, was it the right call that they made to do this?
When you look at the issue, the tool of stop, question, and frisk is used across the country. And as a police officer, we want to use it and need to use it. And it should be used constitutionally, like it always has. I have 30 years in the New York City Police Department. We always used it constitutionally. But then you led into a time period when there's a staffing issue. So we're 7,000 police officers short, and that number varies according to what year.
What's the total force now?
It varies between New York City police officers I represent, we're at 23,000 now.
That's pretty low.
That's pretty low. So that adds more pressure for management to keep the crime numbers down, the summons numbers up, and it's more pressure on the individual police officer. And that has tentacles that go into a number of different issues. One is management wanting to keep the numbers up, not enough staffing on the street for our members, and the safety issues as well for the public and our members, but management pushing to meet the number. So that's when they cross the line into quotas.
So when things really boiled over last fall, without much public announcement, the number of stop, question, frisks seemed to drop down dramatically, but crime, at least into the first part of the 14, it seems to be going down also. So how do we know what works and what doesn't work?
The one thing you don't want to do is find out where the bottom is. And I'll tell you why. If you meet the breaking point in this business, it's too late. You cannot ramp up the police department staffing-wise very quickly. It takes well over a year and a half to recruit, train a police officer, background checks, and then to hire them and put them through the police academy, and then 6 months out in the street where you learn how to do this job. So when we meet that bottom, you won't be able to respond to it quickly. With the short staffing, there's more work on each individual police officers. That leads to mistakes made by police officers at times. The burden is on the police officer. We should look back at when we had safe streets, safe cities.
That was the Dinkins policy.
The Dinkins policy that hired enough police officers. You can debate what that number is, but 7,000 short. Look at it this way. Since September 11th, we're the only police department in the country that has downsized. Every department across the country talks about how to have a more robust police force, a better trained police force. Here, where the attack happened, where the threat is real for attack in the future, we've downsized the police department.
I want to talk about that security threat, but so the de Blasio administration, the policymakers, as you say, has settled a lawsuit having to deal with how these stops on the street are to be administered. But the PBA wants to keep fighting that litigation. What's that about?
I'll tell you why, because we want to make sure we have a seat at the table where the voice of the police officer on the street, where they take the policy and it gets implemented. So the best place to find out how to do it, what's not working, is to listen to that police officer. The way it's set up, the police officer's voice is lost, the political rhetoric that goes on. And remember, all this discussion happens during what some would say is silly time, election season. A lot of things are said. Some candidates said, get rid of stop, question, and frisk. Well, that's not going to work, and the citizens won't particularly want it. We'll want it to be used constitutionally. So we want to make sure we have a voice at the table for the members to make sure the things that are being done are done correctly. And again, going back to my original statements, they passed the laws, they went to federal court, but no one addressed the core of the issue. So we're passing laws that aren't going to fix any type of problem. Plus, if we have a new administration coming in that says we're going to do it differently, stop, question, and frisks have dropped. If the problem is solved, there's no need for these laws, and there's definitely not a need for a federal monitor, because you're afraid it becomes a cottage industry. When you go across the country, federal monitors just continue going on and going on.
There's another aspect of this as well, which is the council passed a law that imposes some level of personal liability on the part of the police officer if they engage in racial profiling. So I'm not sure when you get a description of a perpetrator, alleged perpetrator, how you don't take that into account. But by the same token, there was clearly a very strong and sincerely held feeling that particularly young black men would be just stopped randomly on the street. So shouldn't there be some level of accountability for police officers?
There is no police department in the country that has more oversight than the NYPD. None. There's no agency that has oversight like we do, including the oversight that the city council has had and still has to this day, that if these things were happening, they may not have been using properly. We have internal affairs. We have inspections units within the police department in every borough, in practically every agency. You have 5 district attorneys. You have the U.S. attorneys, 2. There's oversight in the NYPD. Plus, it's a very public department. We don't hide behind the curtains. There is accountability. And what I see on a regular basis is that when there's an issue like the debate that's going on now and the last number of months, is no one wants to address the policy makers. It's not the individual police officer, but the punishment and the discipline lands on the police officer, not those that made the policy.
We're going to talk about your relationship with some of those policymakers when CityWide continues right after this. Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with PBA President Pat Lynch. Bill Bratton, second tour of duty as police commissioner. Came into New York as transit police chief from Boston. People thought he's not going to get his sea legs. What's an out-of-towner, particularly from Boston, going to be able to do in New York? I think within the first couple of years, he established himself as a cop's cop and was respected then. You were a young officer, and Bill Bratton had no money for raises. The police department was literally under assault, the crack wars and the like. And I remember he gave the police officers Glocks. He gave them 9mm weapons. They were less reliable, but they had more bullets. And the cops felt that he was on their side. My perception right? And what's the sense of the rank and file of the new Bill Bratton?
You're absolutely correct. He came in and he understood at that time, and correctly again today, that there was a morale problem in the NYPD, that they didn't feel respected or appreciated by the brass in the NYPD or City Hall for that matter. And he's a professional police officer at heart. And he knew the best way to bring up morale is give the police officers what they need to do their job, and that works for the city as well. At the time, we were outgunned. We had 38s with 6 rounds or 6 bullets, as we say, and the bad guys had semi-automatic weapons. So we knew it's time to trust the police officers to do their job. Let's equip them, educate them, train them, and then trust them to do the job. And the police officers felt that. And what did we do? We literally went out and took the city back block by block.
But as crime went down dramatically, remarkably, the number of bullets fired went up, and the number of, and the incidents became, I think, more threatening to people. Maybe because there were fewer of them, they were perceived as more.
They were perceived as more, but the New York City Police Department is the most restrained police department in the country. You have to bring a number of factors in, including the size of our police department. There's 23,000 police officers, 30-some thousand when you bring in all the ranks of detectives and the bosses and the like. So when you bring that all into it, and the number of interactions we have, we're the most restrained police department in the country. And we have been for some time. And that goes to our training and the being of a police officer. 60% of our members live in the confines of New York City. We want safe streets, and we don't want the public endangered by anyone. So we do our jobs well. Commissioner Bratton then and now recognizes that. And he'll have a discussion with the police officers. He may do it through a video chat or videos out to the commands to say, here's the problem we're facing. I think we can solve it. The first time around, many thought, this guy's crazy. You can't control crime. This is a waste of time. But then he educated. For instance, when he became transit chief, no one wanted to be collecting revenue for the New York City Transit Authority. But then when it was discussed of how a person that's jumping the turnstile, not paying the fare, is a bad guy, and they probably have warrants, and they may well carry a weapon. And lo and behold, that's what happened. And then as police officers, we all felt like, well, we are crime fighters. This may seem like a small thing, but it leads to bigger things. And then he got the trust of the police officers, and we went out and did what we do.
Okay. So now we're in a situation, the city is flush financially, but will be pleading poverty.
That's right.
Your contract has expired. You are a union. You're responsible for your members for getting a raise.
That's right.
And it's not just you. I think in isolation, it's easy to settle one union contract, but all the union contracts are expired. And there isn't enough money. It's $6 billion if everybody got a retroactive pay increase. So forget about raising my taxes to pay for pre-kindergarten spots. Or how is this going to work?
Well, first off, you have to start from the position of what police officers do. And all else follows, even the economics of the city. If you feel safe in the city of New York, you'll bring your business here, that goes to the tax base. You'll stay in the city, also tax base. You'll move into the city, tourism. So the safety factor is the #1 issue. And the reality is, if there's $1 left in the city coffers, it should go to that, because then we'll be able to repair the problems moving forward. I have 30 years as a New York City police officer. I have almost 15 years as president of this great organization. When we were flush with money, when there was tough financial times, the city came, looked across the table from us and said, we're broke. We have to give you zeros. Well, that's not fair. And I also find what's insulting is sometimes the attitude in all city halls is that, why pay them? The police officers are going to go out and do their job 100% anyway. That's insulting, because we're dedicated. We're not going to leave a citizen or a child, an old person on the street suffering. We're going to step up and do what we have to do. Well, there's a moral obligation on the part of the city to pay us for what we do. I speak to a lot of community groups and shows like this, and you'll never ever hear me say that we're better than anyone else. But we are different as police officers. We're asked to do a different job, and we should be treated differently for it.
So is Bill Bratton saying that to Bill Deblasio?
I hope that he is. Speaking to our past relationships with him, and when he was in the private sector and other departments, he understood that. He actually testified for us in arbitrations in the past. And one of the things he testified to, and you alluded it to, where during the Giuliani administration, when he came in as police commissioner, he went to the police office and said, look, we need to take back the city. Do the work now, we'll pay you later. And he believed that, and we believe that. Lo and behold, what happened? We got zeros in that contract. So they didn't keep their end of the bargain. So there's not a lot of trust
How
when you
long
go
has
to
it
the
been?
bargaining
How
table.
long has it been since your members got a raise?
We've been out of a contract for 3.5 years and growing.
He was a safe choice in some ways. He may have been a smart choice. He's clearly a internationally recognized leader in law enforcement with a track record to back it up. But for Bill Deblasio, who was not perceived as being a supporter of the PD, more of a critic, and for whom crime going up, as you say, is kind of the existential issue that he faces as mayor, safe choice, right? If crime goes up and Bill Bratton couldn't stop it, nobody could have stopped it.
I think it was not that it was a safe choice. I think it was the right, smart choice. And I'm sure the mayor, and when he was mayor-elect and candidate before that, he had a lot of discussions with Commissioner Bratton and others. And there's a lot of talent in the NYPD. But Commissioner Bratton has a proven track record. And the fingers of the hand and the information he has and the knowledge he has fits all the different issues, bringing crime down, bringing morale up, all those issues that we talk about. He understood them. So I think it was a smart decision.
What about your relationship with Bill Deblasio? Do you know him well? Has he reached out to you since he became mayor or even during the campaign?
We knew him as public advocate, and we've always had policy discussions. We've spoke many times since he's been elected as well. And when there's a policy coming down, whether we agree with it or disagree with it, we'll have a discussion about it, and that's important. You did not see that for a number of years during the Bloomberg and Giuliani administration before that. Everything was a surprise. There's nothing wrong with having a discussion with the parties involved, even if you're going to disagree. It's important to understand why the other side is going someplace. And more importantly, if there's an issue or a policy, if you have a discussion with the union, which means you're discussing it with the members, maybe we have some ideas that'll make that policy work more effectively. And if you do that and you add those pieces, you'll get, buy-in from the members. We're part of this and we want to make it work. It's the easier and the smarter route to take, but in city government, it's not always taken.
So let's say they came to you, Pat, and they said, you know what, we're as a city, we're blessed. Murder rate down to numbers that I don't think any of us could have dreamed of. Some areas up or down. Pat, what's the number one crime problem in New York? What does New York need to be focusing on? Is it a neighborhood? Is it public housing? Is it a type of crime? What's the number one crime problem that you'd like to see the police leadership focus on more?
It's all of these issues. We spend a lot of time focusing on the number of murders, and that's obviously extremely important.
None of them,
don't want to lessen them.
people may not report if their car got stolen, but they report if their uncle got
That's right.
murdered.
There's a body there, and you have to answer for it. But we have to continue focusing on all the other issues, whether your car is getting broken into, whether you're getting robbed, and you have to watch for those spikes. Now, it might not be dramatic, and we might not be going to the mid-90s or 1975, but if it's rising, it should be a concern. But the problem I see is the staffing to be able to do that. In the past, we did a lot of programs, Impact and the like, which basically said there's a problem in this neighborhood, let's run and put out that problem, put out that fire, stomp out the fire. So you'd send the police officers over to that command, and you'd resolve that issue. But while that's going on, you have an issue in another neighborhood. If you look at the CompStat program that they talk about.
That's the using the statistics to manage police resources.
That's correct, and knowing where the crime is, the numbers. When that was started, it was under Commissioner Bratton's first tour of duty, it had a couple of issues. You had to know where the crime is, give the staffing to the individual neighborhood precincts, and then hold them responsible. Well, we still know where the crime is, and we're still holding folks responsible, but you're not giving them the staffing. Again, finding that bottom, finding that problem. We need to give each precinct the staffing. And I know you know Williamsburg, you were a council member when I was a police officer on patrol and in community relations at the time. And at the time when I first got elected delegate, we had upwards of 200 police officers, almost 300 police officers. Now we have just above 100. That's a problem. So that's only Williamsburg.
Right.
Take that to every neighborhood in the city.
Part of that, 1,000 police officers assigned to counterterrorism work, still needed?
Absolutely. The job of a police officer is a lot more complex than when I first came on. When you first came on, it was traditional crime. Robberies, rapes, murders, the things you see on TV and you see on the news, go after them, resolve them. But now, since September 11th, the real threat of terrorism there. So the job of a police officer is much more complex, and even more complex in going after the crime. Well, we used to take the report and let the detectives resolve it. Now you have police officers on the ground doing preliminary investigations, trying to resolve the issue and the problem right then and there before it just gets thrown in a paper basket. So the job of a police officer is much more difficult. The threat of terrorism is absolutely real, and we need to put 1,000, if not more, police officers in the counterterrorism, but we can't forget traditional crime.
My thanks to Police Union Leader Patrick Lynch, President of the PBA. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us in this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY-TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or contact us at CUNY.TV.